And we're live, streaming from the shadows of New York City. We are Music Matters with Jason Tramm. Thank you so much for joining us for our unique podcast community, where we explore the issues and challenges of the performing arts world as seen through the eyes of distinguished colleagues. Thank you for helping us grow. We just hit 1,400 subscribers, and we are growing steadily thanks to you, our audience. So please remember to subscribe to us on YouTube and smash that bell icon for the most up-to-date information on upcoming guests and topics. We love it when you like and share our videos. It helps us grow. And remember, you can chat with the guests and with me, and feel free to chat in, and we'll ask the questions online. That really makes our conversation more rich. So thank you so much. We have a wonderful guest today, a star in the opera world, Nicholas Tamagna, whose meteoric rise in recent years has made him one of the most in-demand countertenors in the world. Highlights of the last few seasons have been singing Hermano in the award-winning CD recording of Gismondo, by Leonardo da Vinci, on the Parnassus label, and that's a fantastic performance. Everyone should check that out. He made his Met debut very recently in March 2020, right before the pandemic shut down the Met, as Narciso in Handel's Agrippina at the side of Joyce DiDonato, Harry Bickett, Kate Lindsay, Brenda Ray, and it was broadcast worldwide in cinema on the Met broadcast. So in addition to many, many other roles, both contemporary, modern, and Baroque, all over the world. So welcome, Nicholas.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
How are things in Germany right now?
Well, it's finally getting a little warmer, so that's good. And things are sort of slowly coming out of lockdown. So we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel.
We're all ready to turn that page and change the chapter on this, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So why don't we jump in? Tell us, did you always know you wanted to be an artist?
Yes. Yeah, actually, I grew up in a musical family, but not opera. I didn't really know that I was going to become an opera singer. I just knew that I liked performing. I liked being on stage. My mother and sister and her two sisters had a band growing up, and they used to do covers of songs during the 80s. And so I was a little band rat that used to travel along the road with them, and totally grew up in this kind of rock and roll 80s environment.
Now, where did you grow up?
I grew up technically in New York, Peekskill, New York, up in Hudson Valley.
We broadcast from Nanuet, so I know the area well.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's where I grew up. My family's all kind of more or less from there by way of the Bronx, and then earlier by way of Sicily and southern Italy. but yeah, that's been my kind of whole upbringing is this sort of this area, and that's sort of my background. But my family sort of introduced me quite young to the idea of being a performer and being on the road, and that's kind of what I knew from a young age. So that was always very exciting for me. And then I did a lot of theater as a kid. I did a lot of musical theater all the way through high school. Had a wonderful musical theater program in high school at Walter Panis High School. They did 2 performances a year and had a good, put money towards it, and we had nice costumes and sets. And so I got a lot of cool, great stage time, even as a young kid.
Isn't it amazing? As American artists, we've had so many opera singers on the podcast. I love to talk about this. That our first exposure to the stage is going to be musical theater in America.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that's why a lot of times Americans who go then into opera or happen to study opera, if they've had that exposure, and a lot have really good acting chops, because they've been exposed to that a little bit longer than, say, somebody who maybe never did musical theater. I mean, it's because you're really kind of tasked with the ability to not just be a good singer, but you have to really also bring across dialogue and things like this. So I think I was
movement and dance, right? You gotta add that to the mix.
It's movement, being able to move your body and all this sort of stuff. And I've had great luck with working with some really amazing directors in movement and things like this. So that's also been great exposure for me.
So you grew up in a musical family. You grew up with a lot of different styles of music. Was there classical music in the house as well?
Not directly from my family, but I was somehow drawn to it from a very young age. My grandmother remembers me being about 10 years old and watching the PBS great performances of, I think it was Mephistopheles with Samuel Ramey, from which year, I don't know, 80 something, but I don't remember exactly. But I was watching it as a kid and mesmerized by this, and a very strange opera for a 10-year-old to be mesmerized by Mephistopheles from Boito. But
Boy,
okay.
Sam Raimi owned that role.
And but I was just so enthralled by this opera, and so then I got really into it, and I made my grandmother buy me some cassette tapes of like Gilbert and Sullivan operas and things like this. And but then alongside that, I studied piano from a very I think it was about 7 when I started, and continued all the way through, and actually started in college as a piano major, not as a singer. So, and I did that for 2 years at University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and studied under Andrew Willis, who was keyboards, and kind of he exposed me also to a lot of early music because he was a harpsichordist. Wow. And I was kind of getting exposed then. And then while I was there, I studied with James Baumgartner, who I did like a second major in voice. And then I discovered I really wanted to get back to being on stage and being a singer, actor. And but I knew nothing really about being an opera singer. And so that sort of started in my sophomore year at University of North Carolina. But then, and then it kind of went from there. I ended up leaving there because James was not sure if he would continue working there. And I wanted to go back to New York. And I got into Manhattan School of Music and quickly transferred. And I did about 2 years there. And then I did another 2 years doing my master's at Hunter College, City University of New York. So I'm kind of split between the 3 schools. That's how
you're a New York guy at heart. I see that.
And I'm a New York guy at heart. I missed it too much. I had to come back. And especially at that age, I really missed my family and my friends and all of that. And that was something that I'm glad that I did, even though it was a challenge, living in New York in those kind of and then coming out of college right in 2008 when financial crisis, and then trying to make a career as an artist, and you suffer through all sorts of jobs just to pay the bills, and never sure if it's going to actually work out. But if you stick at it and you find your niche, sometimes it works out. I was lucky.
There's a great community of artists in New York City, especially young up-and-comers, and I'm always amazed by some of those small companies that give artists the first couple cracks at it. It's just amazing, the talent. Many of the people I worked with at some of those small concerts all have careers, and they're out there around the world singing, and it's just so exciting to have worked with people and to watch them grow.
Yeah, absolutely. And I got a lot of my early exposure working with a lot of the smaller companies in New York. And getting the opportunity to really learn my craft as an opera singer, and specifically as a countertenor, because that came quite late. I was already I had already studied pretty much my entire master's before I had figured out that I was a countertenor.
Really? So you came in as a tenor or as a baritone, right?
As a tenor that I really wasn't, but and then we kind of played around with it. What is my voice? And I studied with all these wonderful teachers who eventually kind of figured out who I was. And eventually landed with my teacher, who I'm still with, Alyssa Grimaldi, who really helped form this for me and make it clearer for me what it is that I was as a singer, and identify myself and get my technique more solid with her. But I countertenor came to me quite late. I think I was about 25. 26, so I mean, it wasn't like I started in school this way, or I didn't come up through the church choirs like often happens with a lot of countertenors as well. It was something that I discovered later, but it has its other advantages that I had exposure to a lot of other things, and I'd spent a lot of time discovering my voice in a different mode as well, which I think informs a lot of the way that I sing as a countertenor as well. So I wouldn't have changed my path in any way. I think it exposed me and opened me to many different things. When you're in it, you feel like you're losing time and you don't know where your path is and you feel lost. But that, as you get older, I think, and as you tend to find your way and you feel like you're finally in your stride, you start to realize that all of that builds to something. So sometimes you just have to trust that it's going somewhere. Yeah.
That artistic journey is unique to everyone, especially with countertenors. I always find fascinated by how you find your voice. When did you first find it clicking? Like this is something new. Who introduced you to it? What were your first pieces that you sang?
Well, so I actually discovered it because I was very frustrated as a singer, and I, had studied up to this point through my master's, and I was like, "Why doesn't this work?" I understand the technique. I knew that I had a lot of experience. I had a lot of affirmations from people that I was great on stage, that I was very musical, but I was having technical difficulties, as a tenor, which I was pretty much up until the end, which is part of the reason that it took me so long. I think maybe if I had discovered that I was more of a high baritone earlier, things might have been a little bit easier in the modal voice. But I also don't know if I ever would have been happy, because I had the choice at one point, a fork in the road, where I could have gone to being a light baritone or I could have gone to be a countertenor. And with my current teacher, Alyssa Grimaldi, and we just discovered that for me, I came in one day and had a lesson, and we were going through all sorts of things. I did everything from musical theater to countertenor. And the only thing I knew Baroque was Lascia ch'io piango, which is nothing that I would ever sing in the repertoire because it's really a soprano aria, but whatever. And I sang it and in this lesson, and she just like looked at me and she was like, "Where was that for the last year?"
We're on to something new. Hold on.
Yeah,
Hold the presses.
And her husband, who never says anything, John's always very quiet. He sits in the back and listens to all the lessons coming through the house every day. And he came out afterwards and said to her, after I had left, and he was like, "Whatever that boy just did, he should keep doing that." So I don't know. It kind of clicked right away for me. But when you really, of course, it wasn't like that. It was that I had spent many years actually sort of developing that voice without knowing it. I was singing a lot in church choirs. I had a regular job at St. Boniface, the Brooklyn Oratory Church, and I had sung high tenor in that choir for a long time, and a lot of early music. And I had done stuff with Johannes Somari and Amor Artis.
Oh, rest in peace, Johannes Somari. I used to sing in the choir with them before I became a conductor.
Oh, really? Wow.
Many years ago, yep.
Well, my first exposures were through working in these choirs, and because it was such a high tessitura for me, and I wasn't really a tenor, but I could do this sweet sort of mixing, like a voix mixte thing with my voice, which was really just me bringing my falsetto head voice farther down and farther down, farther down. And then I don't know, I just started developing this without really knowing it. And, of course I had something of the ability already. It wouldn't have worked otherwise. But I think that I attribute a lot of my ability to sing in this voice type because I had sort of been doing that all along, yeah, and then I got some of my first opportunities. One was actually Johannes Somari gave me my first Messiah with Princeton Pro Musica when he was still alive. That was lovely. And then I did a couple of other concerts as an alto soloist with him. And then also I had done some things with some smaller companies, Pocket Opera of New York, which doesn't exist anymore. I did Alcina. And then, of course, Amore Opera with Nathan, who gave me a lot of early opportunities doing rare, weird things for countertenor, like Orlovsky, although that's been done, but it's not very often that a countertenor gets to do it.
The Metzgos get snarly when you do that, but
yeah, exactly. And doing like The Witch, say in Hansel and Gretel, I also had the opportunity to do a couple of times with them, with Manhattan. So I had a few opportunities to do that role, which was fun. So yeah, and I think New York gave me a lot of that first opportunity fodder to really kind of build myself and figure out who I was as a countertenor. Early on, and especially because I kind of developed into it so much later, I needed opportunities to kind of find it, and I wasn't going to be in school anymore. I couldn't find that in school. I had to find it outside. So this was kind of a training ground for me in a time when also, this is changing now, but I did a few of these auditions, but young artist programs really weren't taking countertenors, and it was difficult coming up through that to just get any kind of opportunity. Now that's slowly changing, with the next generation. It's not completely, but it's changing. And yeah, so that's amazing now that also many more countertenors have won, say, the Met competition, for instance. And, so the attitudes are changing. The technique has changed a great deal in the last, I would say 30, 40 years. I came up, I worked with some wonderful previous artists too. Like I worked a lot with Brian Asawa before he passed away. So I got some exposure to the previous generation as well, and learned a lot. And so it's lovely to be in this kind of voice type, because we're not that new on the scene. I mean, like, yeah, but we're also not so old that like you can see the full trajectory of it, and you can still be you're part of this kind of growing history. It's relatively new when you compare it to other voice types.
It is relatively new, and it's evolving rapidly.
Yeah. I mean, it's of course been around for centuries, and it's been used in church choirs, and we could talk about what the historical use of the countertenor voice was, but when we're talking about it as a viable operatic voice in the modern opera scene, it's been a relatively short history. So I'm really lucky to have been a part of that in the time that I've come up through. So.
Well, I'm always fascinated by finding the repertoire and finding your core roles. And so, what was your first professional role?
I guess I would have to say, I mean, not concert, but opera role, I would have to say was Opera Memphis. I got hired by Michael Ching to do Orfeo in a production there. And that was probably my first really big professional gig. And it was a great opportunity. I got to do Orfeo. Orfeo is like, you're on stage the entire time. It's a huge deal. And the fact that he gave me a chance to do it with really no background experience, and but I gave, I guess, an impressive enough audition, and and it was an interesting chance to do it because we did it alongside a tenor and a mezzo, so on alternating nights, and the idea was to kind of show the three versions of the opera that can be performed, and and then I got some really great exposure through that, some great reviews, and that kind of started things off a little bit for me. And but then I kind of discovered, I did a lot in the beginning. I did roles spanning a very wide range. I'm still a kind of rangy countertenor. I would consider myself an alto more than a soprano, but I guess I should really say that I'm more of a mezzo, because it's not like I just exclusively sit in this lower range. I do have the ability to go a little bit higher than maybe your average alto. So it's always kind of hard in our voice type because we're having to use monikers from another voice type. We don't have our own, and it's always that's always a bit of a challenge. So that's one thing that I hope we can start to kind of solidify a little better, is how that is showing that we're all so different, because I think people kind of put us all under one umbrella a lot of times, and people who do casting,
the voices are so different. Yeah, every time I hear countertenors, some are so high, almost soprano, and someone like yourself has got that lower chord of the voice, and it's like a different instrument. It's
a very different instrument, and there's lots of shades of gray in between, and and so I feel like it's very it's something that we have to do in the next decades, is kind of be a little bit kinder to our voice type and find ways to kind of really identify ourselves, so that people are more aware of what's appropriate to a certain color or a certain weight voice, and not just blanket thinking that every countertenor can sing everything, so and that's one thing that Parnassus has been championing for a few decades now, but it's something that's perhaps a little bit farther along in Europe than it is in the US, and so for me that's been a huge advantage to have gotten the exposure early on in Europe. I started so then I would say my other really big debut was my European debut when I came to Germany for the first time, and I did a smaller role in a Handel, the Händefestspiele in Karlsruhe, where I sang Oronte in Riccardo I, next to Franco Fagioli, singing Riccardo I. And so this was huge exposure, and I was perhaps a little bit unprepared for that one opportunity, but I did well, but I think I've grown a lot since then, and but it was a very nervous experience for me because I'd never been singing in Europe, but things kind of took off after that. Then I started doing a lot with Le Poème Harmonique in France, and then I started getting more and more involved with the smaller regional theaters in Germany, and then picked up at all the other Handel Festspiele, and orchestras, working more closely directly with orchestras. And then Parnassus kind of came in the picture in the last couple of years. So, given that I had a late start and that, I had to really kind of rush to get my career going, I feel quite, satisfied that it.
How exciting! Everything just like locked in, and you were ready for it. And sometimes when you start on that new road, it's just meant it just works. And all of a sudden you just take off. And it's wonderful.
Well, and I think it's because it felt natural. Like one of the first things I said to my teacher was, this just feels like me for the first time. Like when I'm singing, it's not another voice that I'm trying to put on, and that's been the most lovely compliment that I've ever gotten from people is often that just how natural it sounds to me, like as a person and a singer when I do it. And that feels good because that's how it feels to me. And you never know if that's how it's coming across, but you hope that if that connection is so deep and so strong within you, that's also being transmitted outwardly. And that's, I have to say, has been always the case as a countertenor, is that I feel the most me. So, yeah.
Well, as countertenors, you have a choice. The repertoire tends to be Baroque, right, or it tends to be very modern, and it's written for countertenors. Now, the Baroque is fascinating to me because originally written for castrati voices. How does that lay in different voice parts? I mean, because we really can't create the exact sound of the castrati; it doesn't exist. So, what are some of the challenges with that repertoire?
Generally, range can be an issue for some things, but not everything. I mean, there's tons of alto roles. There's a lot of alto parts that fit our voices perfectly. If you have a good middle and you can really negotiate the low, and then if you ornament and you have a good access to your top, you can make a very exciting cadenza or ornamentation line in there. So generally, that's not so much the hang up. What can be the hang up is often a lot of these parts, if they were written for, say, someone like Farinelli or Caffarelli even, they had such huge breath spans. And sometimes these lines are just even kind of abnormal. Even if you aren't a countertenor, like any other voice type would find it abnormally long to have to sing. And so you have to master, I think, your breath control in a very different way when you sing Baroque music. It's different from, say, with contemporary music, where you're mastering more of your ear, your ability to lock into complex rhythms and harmonies and things like this. It's maybe not so complex rhythmically and harmonically. Once you're used to the language, the way that Baroque music works, you can feel they're all dances, more or less, that everything's based on. And once you understand the art of that dance and the phrasing in which it's supposed to go, then that becomes apparent. And, harmonically, it's often interesting, but it's not, compared to what we've listened to for the last 200 years, not so out of the realm of something that you can pretty quickly understand. So, but what becomes more difficult is the virtuosity. You have to really master your ability to really extend your breath for longer passages. And I find also the ability to, which has also, I should say, the breath has a lot to do also with the phrasing. So once you learn how the grace and the phrasing of the dance is supposed to go, often the breath sort of follows. But if you just try to work from one and not the other, and not find the connection, it can be a lot harder. So that's something I find Europeans in general versus Americans learn better. They have a great sense of what the rhythmic phrasing of things are. Whereas in America, we have a really good solid technical foundation. So a really good sense sometimes of this sort of bel canto technique, which we then can carry over into various genres within the classical musical world. But I would personally say a good combination of both is what you need in this Baroque milieu, because if you don't have that, it's very difficult to bring this music across. And of course, you have to make everything for you with Baroque music. It was written for a specific singer, and if you were the singer then at that time, of course, there would have been things that would have been adjusted for you. If something is just really not possible in your voice, it is possible to change some things. Not everything, of course. And if you have to change a role so drastically, then perhaps it's not the right role for you.
Good point.
there's like, if there's like one note, or you need to take a breath in a strange place, or those things are sometimes open to debate, but it depends. It really depends.
Yeah, back in the day, even up until Mozart's time, he wrote the arias when he got to the location and wrote them there. I mean, these things were constantly shifting based on the voices who were. So when we try to recreate these pieces, we're trying to recreate them from. It's like playing echo with the past, right? It's interesting.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, we have to also keep in mind tunings. Depending on how you're doing the piece, if you're going to try to do it in, what we've now said as a standard Baroque tuning, even though that really didn't exist. And so it would be interesting to really look more in depth at that sort of thing, which a lot of Baroque ensembles that are more specifically centered in the repertoire do try to do. But there's many more tunings outside of A440 and A415.
There certainly are. And ask a musicologist, and it's an exhausting conversation.
Exactly. And, but often, to just take it out of the academic and more into the practical, it makes a big difference in the role when you do it in the key that was originally imagined, and that changes everything. You're like, oh, that's why this was so hard before. When you do it in this key, it feels totally easy, so there's things like that sometimes, specifically with, like, say, French Baroque repertoire, which is not really my repertoire, but that's often the case when you really do it in the tunings of the time, of which we have a lot of treaties and perhaps a better knowledge of than, say, the music coming out of Italy at the time. It's a little bit less codified as it was in the French courts, say. But from town to town in Italy, you were basing often tunings based on the local organ. So there was a lot of variance between.
And we happen to know where those sit because the pipes still survive. We can actually test them and say, hey, that's actually the tuning. But church tuning was different than the theater tuning, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Often the case as well.
Which makes it more complicated, yeah.
It makes it even more complicated, but having a sense of that people had different things in their ear than what we perhaps imagine now, just looking at the page, so it's, that's an interesting topic as well. And that's something that we explore a lot as Baroque singers. But we often get asked to do things in modern pitch, which proposes a whole new set of, challenges. But that's also, okay, that's when maybe having to make adjustments to the originally written thing, I feel, is sometimes okay if, you don't have a choice and you're doing it in a key that was never intended. So there might be something that you might just have to take a breath here, or you might have to do something in a way that maybe you wouldn't do if it was lowered or made higher, or whatever the case may be.
We have a question from Franz from Vienna, who asks, so what are some of the most difficult roles you've sung, both in the Baroque sense and in the modern sense?
Okay. I'll start with the modern sense. In the modern sense, there's two that come to mind. Akhenaten was my first really contemporary opera that I did. And this opera poses a unique challenge that you have to stay within pretty much a fifth of your voice the entire time. And it's that poses a unique challenge, because you would think, oh, well, it's just in the middle of your voice, you could just, that's easy. It's not, but it's not. It can get very taxing because you're never leaving the same area. And it's sort of like if you always worked on one muscle the whole time, that of course would get tiring. So what you learn in a piece like that is how to shift things in your mechanism so that it never feels quite the same every time you sing the same note, but still stays in line and still stays in not to pull yourself completely out of whack. But this is the thing that you learn in that. And I actually learned a very unique trick that I always had to keep my throat open, because the throat automatically wants to just kind of slightly close when you're staying in this tessitura the whole time. And so I would do these things where I would constantly reinitiate an opening whenever I could find a rest or something like this. And that's now informed other things I've done entirely. So it was a technique that I kind of developed out of necessity.
Yeah, and there aren't many people who've sung this role, right? How many people have sung Akhenaten professionally? Probably not that many. So you have done it.
Yeah, it's probably, I would say under at least... I think it's under 30 or maybe a little more, but not maybe much more. Who knows? It's not, the piece is also not that old, in the grand scheme of things, and doesn't get performed every day. So it's a really interesting thing. to perform this piece. The other piece that I've done is Flight. I've done this now with Opera Omaha.
Jonathan Dove's that piece is getting performed quite a bit.
Quite a bit more now. Seattle just did a wonderful production on video that I happened to catch with my friend Randall in it, and there's been some other recent productions in Germany as well. I was supposed to be part of one actually, and that's how I ended up here in the early part of the pandemic. Which is quite funny that I was about to play a refugee stuck in an airport, and meanwhile I've been stuck in Germany since 2020. Partly by choice, not completely like the
great
refugee.
Place to be stuck.
but definitely a lot by choice. But a lot of things became weirdly mirrored in my life with this opera afterwards.
Art imitating life. I love that.
Yeah, it was very strange. One of the weirdest is that this role, you sing a lot about a stone in your pocket that you give to these people in throughout the course of the opera, and they're magic stones, and you're trying to get them to be on your side and believe you. And the weird thing is that I had, shortly after arriving, kidney stones.
Oh, no.
I had to deal with that while in Germany.
Oh.
So I was like, this opera better not become any more true than it currently is, because I can't take it anymore. But it was very funny. But yeah, these would be the modern pieces. And Baroque stuff, I mean, there's always challenges. So far, I would say, one thing that's a unique challenge, but I don't see it as like a difficult thing, is doing a lot of these we're basically reprising pieces that have not been heard for 200 years. So there's no point of reference for them. It's not like the Handel Ausgabe that we've, really kind of exhausted. We've gone through it. Of course, we can always discover more, and we can always get more in depth. And Handel is just such a special composer. He's been like probably most of my bread and butter for most of my career. But to get to explore people like composer Hasse, Caldara, Porpora, composers that perhaps we hear less of, especially in the United States, but more and more in Europe, because of the various wonderful Baroque orchestras that are here, and because of production companies such as my agency Parnassus. And so that's been a lovely and interesting challenge to bring these operas to life without too much of a reference. It's not like we've heard them before, so we're creating them completely from our own ears. And
how exciting to get to bring it to life after so long.
Yeah.
What's the research like when you're preparing a role like that?
We do a lot of actually looking at the libretto, looking at the text, a lot of like trying to discover what is trying to be expressed, what are some of the conventions at the time, wherever it happens to be written by that particular composer, that librettist, references, things like that. There's so much in Baroque that's allegory, and you have to kind of get the layers of things to understand better how to express it. Of course, looking at the piece, understanding like what is the dance form that we're looking at here, that informs a lot of what you do. Creating ornamentation for it, that's always a lot of fun for me, because that's the part that you get to be really creative. And I think that's probably why I've been most drawn to doing Baroque music, is that I love the improvisational aspect of it. I was a lot younger doing jazz and playing as a jazz band in high school on the piano. And so for me, the improvisational aspect was already very strong in my mind, and I liked being able to do that and not to have to be forced into a tradition that it's only done this way. And if you deviate too far from it, that people start to look at you like, what are you doing? And of course there's a caveat with that in Baroque music. Of course, there's a protocol, there's a sense of things. You don't just ornament whatever you want. There's
historical parameters that you work within, right?
There are things that within you have to work, but you have so much more freedom in Baroque music to express yourself in a way that I found I never had before doing a lot of Baroque music. So I particularly love that aspect, and getting to really delve into creating ornamentation by looking at the score more in depth, finding, perhaps a unique instrument within the orchestration that I can sort of imitate, or that I can bring out like an imitation of, or do it in reverse, or do it upside down, or do it up on octave, finding all these ways to kind of like...
That's exciting.
Yeah. So that's a lot of fun for me. But it poses a challenge, of course. And these operas often, if you do them in full, they take hours to get through, and you have to have stamina, to get through things like this, and really know your voice, know your know your technique, know your voice, and and that's been a lovely challenge, being a part of the Baroque, world in the last, I would say, 10 years now, and then getting to bring it to places like the Met, and to have it be such a success as it was a huge gratifying experience for me, because that's not a hall that's known necessarily for Baroque music. And it made a really great impression at a time just before everything kind of went poof. And, so I'm very lucky that I had that opportunity to be alongside such great singers. And
well, let's talk about that debut. And so a 4,000 seat hall, what's it like being a countertenor in a 4,000 seat hall? Does the voice naturally project? How did it feel singing in such a large space?
I have to tell you, you think that the Met is going to be a difficult place to sing. It's not, though. I really didn't feel that. I felt that the Met has a beautiful acoustic. I think that my voice already has a kind of natural, fuller presence, very frontal presence. And so for me, it didn't necessarily bother me in that space, because I already had a very kind of projected out voice. But the thing that's cool about that space is you never feel like it's dead, even with all the people in it. It always goes all the way out, and you get something back. And so orally, it's a very gratifying experience to sing on that stage. You actually feel bigger in a way. So, it's a commonly held notion that it's got to be difficult to sing in there. But I would say a lot of people, if you speak to them, they'll say the same thing, that have sung on that stage. Joyce even said that to me. And, in our first day on the stage, she was like, you'll see how lovely it is, actually. And you don't need a lot. You can do a lot on that stage dynamically without having, I think it's when you don't trust it. And it's a little bit like what they force you to do in the auditions there. If you ever sing for one of these general auditions for the Met, they often do it in this lecture hall, which has a horrible acoustic. And, it's not intended for that. It's intended as a lecture hall. And, but I think they do it. Sometimes I think they do it this on purpose, because it's a good space to see whether a singer is going to push. And if you can sing in that hall and listen in a way and not give more than you're capable of, you can sing there. And I think that that's something that you have to be able to do in the Met. Like you can't give more than's coming back at you, and then you'll be fine. It's a trust thing, I think, more than anything. But yeah, it's an amazing space, and to look out into that expanse is probably one of the highlights of my career to date.
Exciting. So being a New Yorker, coming back home, singing a principal role at the Metropolitan Opera, take us backstage that night. What was it like? How nervous were you? Do you get nervous? How do you prepare for a performance like that?
It's interesting. I wasn't supposed to do it. I was a cover initially. I came into the production as a cover. I was not hired to do it initially. And I pretty much within the first week, at the first rehearsal, I had to sing, because the person who was supposed to do it wasn't there. And then it turned out, for various reasons that were more he couldn't get there, and there was issues with that. It had, otherwise he would have been there. But basically I got it by default that way. And, and then I was singing in all of the rehearsals. And after about 2 weeks, the management, of course, went to the team, to the director, to Harry, the conductor. And so, he said, and of course, they were immediately like, no, he should do this role, and David's was amazing. And, and I immediately kind of fell in line with the team. And I was really afraid after 2 weeks that it was going to get taken away from me. But, I knew that was always a possibility, but luckily it just worked out, and I got my opportunity, and I was ready. I was prepared in the first rehearsals. So I think that made a big difference. And I thought it was actually a perfect role for a debut, because it wasn't too much. Like, I've done far bigger roles, and I think that's partially why I wasn't so nervous. It was, it was 2 arias. It can be hard. I've done a lot of these roles as well, where you only have 2 arias and you don't have a lot of time to prove yourself. And in Baroque music, it's all about that. It's all, it's an all-star show of vocal acrobatics and what you can do. But I had my opportunities and I had my stumbles before getting to the Met with figuring out how to put the biggest impression in a role like this. And and so I feel like I was prepared for that, and so that's probably why I wasn't as nervous as I could have been. But everybody has, of course, little jitters and things like that, when you think, oh my God, this is about to happen. But I felt so greatly supported by everyone in the cast, the entire team, Sir David McVicker, and also from Harry Bickett. And, I felt really well in this position and supported by everyone at the Met. And so for me, it was just a loving kind of environment, and I felt very at home. And that was so nice to have in such a high stakes environment and a high stakes opportunity. And it made a big difference. I think it also helps that I got to play comedy and I didn't have to. And I think when you play comedy versus doing drama, there's a certain, that levity that you have to bring across. And because it's all timing and it's very and very specific, and you have to do everything in an order to make it funny, this specificity of movement and gesture with the voice and with the body keeps you distracted. You can't really be too nervous. Like, you have to be so concentrated the whole time on how you're delivering things in time. And so for me, doing comedy has always been a lot of fun, because you can just like give over to the timing and and just abandon yourself in it and be completely, like not self-conscious at all. Like, you just, and so that was a great role to do that, because I could just be a complete wacko on stage. and But what I was happy to see, and this is what I was really hoping that would come across, was that, it's very easy then to just be labeled a character singer and funny and that's that. But I was happy to see that a lot of people thought that, I was extremely funny, but that I also brought musical depths and things to it, and tone that I think was maybe not expected from a comic role. So that's nice. Like, I was happy that I proved two things in this debut, which could have been not so easy given how little material I had and the type of character that it was. So and that also I think is because the team had my back with all of it and made the show as great as it was, and we were very lucky to have that opportunity.
What was it like being on your first broadcast, your first live from the Met broadcast?
Wow, that was also, wow, that was a huge, but you don't know, luckily they do it late. Like, you've already done several shows, so that's nice. Like, it's not like it's the first show, that would have been more nerve-wracking. But I think, and you kind of watch it going on in the back as you come off stage, especially with me, because I had a smaller role, so I had a lot of time in between. And so that was interesting to kind of get confronted with, oh, wow, that's how it looks in between as you walk to your dressing room. But, but it's a fantastic thing that the Met does. And, and I got so much more exposure because of that. I mean, the people that saw it from all over the world and continue to write me. And I have to say, that's a huge blessing in this last year and a half, that this continues to get played by the Met. It got picked as like a viewer's choice thing. Like, people love this show so much, and they continue to write about it. And they continue to say, I mean, like, I've never had a show that kept on giving so much.
A gift that keeps on giving, that's for sure. And people see it all over the world, right? That's amazing.
Yeah, and in a time when basically everything went down and we had no more audience and we had nowhere to go on stage, and nobody, no affirmation of our work and no work to do, it was a nice thing to have this constant kind of reminder of having had such a success, with something. And I'm very grateful for that, really, because it helped me get through those months, especially when we were in the early lockdown days.
Let's transition to what are some of the innovations and self-discoveries you've made during this period? And every artist is so different with this question. I'm always interesting because, some people have transitioned to a virtual, doing lots of online streaming concerts. Some have, taken up reading or learning languages. How have you dealt with this time period?
Well, a lot of things were practical, but I think, some of the initial things that I had to do was to decide would I go back to New York? And, that is my home. But my whole family, my partner's there. Um, it was a difficult decision, but I thought in the long run, looking at the way the things were going in the world, I felt my chances were better if I stayed here. I had been working in Germany, like I said, since 2014, so it wasn't a completely new place for me. And I had particularly worked in Oldenburg before, so I knew this town very well. And I got sort of, I don't know, this intuition in me that just said, you know what, I think it's better if you stay. And that was a difficult decision because it meant that I had to give up on that. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to walk with this for a minute because
That's okay. It's a podcast. We're used to it.
somebody's at the door and I need to let them in because they have no key.
We've had all sorts of fun. We've had kids pop up in the back, dogs jump on people's laps. No worries.
Yeah. But I wanted to, anyway. So this was something that I had to make a decision, and I felt like I would have to speak, of course, better German. My German was actually quite good before I came, but I felt like, okay, now is the time to concentrate and really, really perfect it. And so I've had a really great opportunity here now for the last year and a half, and being with friends here who I speak with every day, only speaking German, and so my German has gotten like, whew, yeah. So that's been great. I've really kind of worked even more so on that. Other things that have been, yes, doing a lot of virtual. I actually did one thing that was extremely challenging. We did this amazing production with video of Orfeo, with Jorge Parodi conducting. And this, what was really cool about this was opera in Williamsburg in Virginia. And Nama, who runs the company, she wanted to create something with a green screen. So basically we had to act in front of a green screen, but we had to record everything beforehand. This was a huge challenge. And in that time of learning how to record remotely, I started to learn how to use Logic Pro. I started investing in getting like a better microphone set up, all of these things. And so now I've really learned how to do a lot more recording engineering, a lot of stuff that I probably would have never really learned, although I was always interested in it.
You would have been so busy, you would never have time to learn all that stuff scratch.
Yeah, I would have been like, that's something I'll pay somebody who's the expert and, has spent their whole lives learning how to do this. And not that I would never do that in the future, but it's great that I've had the exposure to learn something of that craft, because now going into recording, I have a completely different sense of that. And I think maybe this will inform how I record things in the future too. How I learn how to learn a piece, especially before a recording, getting the opportunity to actually record myself on good equipment before I go to actually do the real recording, will say a lot about maybe what I have to do, because singing into a mic is a very different thing from singing in the theater. And up until, I would say, the last couple of years, I didn't do so much recording early on in my career. I was a stage singer. And so, this has been a learning curve for me. And I've been able to perfect that even better in this time when I had projects that were only online. And I'm doing a lot of stuff also with composers remotely. My friend Rafael Fusco, I did a wonderful piece of.
He was a guest on the show not too long ago.
Was he? Yeah,
wonderful guy.
Yeah, and I'm trying to get him more involved actually on some other projects of mine. I love his work, and he writes so beautifully for me. I'm doing some stuff with a good friend of mine that I went to college with, Medina. She's a clarinetist, and she and I are trying to do pieces for countertenor and voice. Countertenor and clarinet with sometimes piano, not everything. So we'd like to do this recording. We've been kind of planning that out, but we've done some stuff remotely for the composers to hear the pieces they've written for us so that we could get started and make notes about what we need to do in order to express it better for the composer the way they want it. So this has been really a cool way of working and learning and preparing to record things in a different way. And I think that'll inform how I do this in the future for sure. Of course, navigating my whole life now, becoming a permanent resident here was a huge change. And, I think that was something that was coming anyway, but it would have not maybe happened quite so quickly if it wasn't for Corona. And so that's an interesting thing that changed very quickly for me.
Sometimes the decisions are made for you, and you've set that new path out, and it just puts you on that path. And it sounds like you're well poised to turn that page. And we mentioned before that you have a lot of things coming up, that things in the books ready to go.
Yeah, and I had the amazing luck of staying here because, and what was in my mind I thought might happen, that Europe in general opened up sooner than the United States with a lot of things, especially when it came to theater. And in the fall, I was able to perform with the Opera House in Hannover, and we did an Il Trionfo with Abstand with distance, and with all these kind of protocols in place, which is a weird, cool, kind of surreal experience, and limited audience. Like, you look out and it's only every other few seats, but that was kind of an amazing thing to get that opportunity and to perform and to actually work in between, which many my colleagues didn't have that opportunity. And so I'm very grateful for that. And I feel ready to take on the things that are coming. We have some small concerts that are coming up. One big one in Teatro de Wien, finally bringing this Hassa opera with Parnassus to Caio Fabrizio. I'm really excited to see what this next few months bring. Of course, things have changed a bit, but I've already gotten some exposure with that. It's not going to be completely new to me. This whole new Corona world and working in theater has been already starting. We've been putting sort of the rules of the game in place here, at least in Germany, for the last months, and many places in Europe as well. Hopefully the United States will follow suit. And
we're all hoping, that's for sure. We're all hoping.
Seattle's doing a great job with their live streams. That's amazing. And, some other companies are doing similar things, or they're planning things outdoors. I think Santa Fe maybe, I don't remember.
That makes complete sense, Santa Fe, being outdoors already.
I think they'll still plan forward with that, from what I know. And the Met, of course, is trying to also get beyond things and see what they can do also in the upcoming months, especially if anything can be done outdoors like they typically do anyway in the summertime. So hopefully, US can start to figure that out. But I'm hoping to get home at some point soon. It's been a long time since I've seen my whole family and my partner, and that's been the hardest thing in the pandemic. But I've definitely made the best of a not so great situation, and I've been very lucky. I've been
What have you learned about yourself through this period?
I think before, my life was very constantly on the road, and I didn't have a lot of time to just slow down and be with myself, and this time I had the great luck of having a couple of really wonderful friends actually here in Oldenburg that have been so incredibly helpful and kind of exposed me to the sort of region of where I'm living in Oldenburg and this kind of Norddeutschland area, and getting to explore parts of the area of this part of Germany that I've never seen. But what was interesting about myself in this time was I spent a lot of time by myself on my bike, going out into, the countryside and connecting with nature. And I didn't realize how much I missed that and how much I needed that. And I think that these last few months, I've had the enormous advantage of living in a kind of countryside area with these beautiful, woods and bike paths and fields. And I was able to just kind of go out and be with myself, with my thoughts, and, connect again with myself in a more grounded way, and to connect with nature, which I, of course, has always been in my heart and fascinated by, and I've always loved to be in the outdoors and things like that, but I've never had really the opportunity. I've been mostly on the road, been mostly in big cities, and this has it's also exciting, but I've spent the last 38 years of my life in that scenario, and it's nice to finally have that opportunity to connect with something, with nature, and more grounded, and to have that time.
You'll be re-entering the arts cauldron, centered and ready to make beautiful art again. It's wonderful.
That's my hope.
What advice do you have for young people coming up in the field today, coming up after COVID, is in that post-COVID chapter?
Yeah, I think, my advice still stands, is that you have to love what you do. You have to find the thing that makes you as an artist, you. what makes it special for you. What is the aspect of what you do that you enjoy most, and zero in on that and figure out, how can I maximize that and make that my primary way of supporting myself, both emotionally, intellectually, financially, whatever it may be. And I think that sometimes it's okay. I think one of the biggest things I try to let people know is that journey, because it wasn't so self-evident for me, and sometimes it doesn't happen the way you see your other colleagues getting it happening. That can very well happen, that you don't, right out at 21, join, a major young artist program, or you win a major competition award and your career is made. Like, a lot of people have a much longer journey, maybe a more difficult one, maybe one with a lot more turns and curves and things like this. But we all have our way. And it's, I think, about listening to yourself and listening to the input around you and connecting those dots and figuring out what makes it real for you. For me, it took a while to get there, but also part of that journey, connecting with all these things, all the things I learned along the way, all of the experiences I had, the exposures, the abilities and the things I learned, the languages, the exposure to movement and dance and to musical theater and to jazz, and all of that informs who I am as an artist, even though I would probably be identified now as a Baroque specialist who sings mostly Handel. But that's not completely who I am, and I would not be that specialist person without the exposure to all these things. So I always say, get as many opportunities and exposures and possibilities that you can in your life. Travel, see things, explore things, push your boundaries, figure out what makes you uncomfortable, and discover what's there for you as fodder, as an artist. And it's not going to happen necessarily in, 2 years. It could take you 10 years. It could take you 20 years. If you're a really specific voice type that takes you into maturity, it could take you much longer. And in that time, you have to find other things to satisfy you, to nourish your soul as an artist. And I think that's the important thing, is to have other outlets, not just be a singer, and
so important.
Yeah.
I tell my undergraduates that the music career is not a sprint, it's a marathon.
It truly is. Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. We have a lot of young people listening. It's so important to hear these stories, because it's so easy to judge. You look at a soprano who a coloratura comes out of the womb singing the doll song, but it takes most people way longer to find their path.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, Nicholas, thank you so much for spending the time with Music Matters. Really appreciate you, and can't wait to see you back on the stage again.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
How can people find out more about you, and where can they go to get updates?
Well, for sure, you can go to my website at nicholastamagna.com. That usually gets pretty updated. Probably needs a new update, but things have been changing so quickly from week to week here. But there are some new things coming soon, so stay tuned there. You can also follow me on Facebook and Instagram. By just searching my name. Usually my accounts are linked to Tamagna in some way. And also I'm on Twitter. But yeah, I try to keep people updated that way when things come. And I'm looking forward to getting started, hopefully with this first concert at the end of June at Theater an der Wien, June 28th, with Parnassus doing this Hasse opera. So yeah, looking forward to the next journey.
Continued success, and I look forward to catching up with you down the road.
Yes. Okay, Jason. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on Music Matters with Jason Tramm. Please remember to subscribe to us and hit that like bell for the most up-to-date information on upcoming guests and topics. To see our library of 150 past episodes, check out our website at www.jasontramm.net. And remember, keep music alive.